He had stopped looking for her, 8 years searching, until the pain turned into silence. But that day, stuck in the traffic of Madrid, he looked up, and life gave back what he thought was lost forever. Sitting on the sidewalk with 2 children who had his same eyes, there she was, Elena, his past, his present, and 2 sons he never knew existed. Sometimes destiny does not ask permission to change your life. It only needs you to look up at the exact moment. Like this, if this touched your heart. It's not just a click, it's a silent hug between souls that understand. Comment how you think this story will end. Your opinion matters. And if you have not yet subscribed, it costs you nothing, but for us, it means the entire world. Thank you for being here. The October sun fell upon Grand Avenue with that golden light that made the glass of the buildings shine. But David Williams did not see any of that. His black SUV was trapped in the dense mid-afternoon traffic, and he drummed his fingers on the leather steering wheel, mentally reviewing the numbers of his latest business acquisition. 42 years old, Italian custom-made suits, Swiss watches that were worth more than an entire family car. David had built a real estate investment empire from scratch, with iron discipline and decisions that others considered risky. But in that moment, waiting for the traffic light to change, something distracted him. A woman was sitting on the sidewalk in front of the convenience store. She held a piece of cardboard with shaky letters written in black marker. "I have 2 children. I only ask for food." David had seen hundreds of people begging on the streets of the city. He usually looked away, not out of cruelty, but because he had learned to protect himself from a pain that he could not solve with checks or donations. But this time was different. The woman wore a navy blue jacket torn at the elbows, stained grey pants, and worn-out sneakers that barely had soles. Her brown hair, tangled and dull, fell over her shoulders. Her back was hunched as if she carried the weight of the world. And then it happened. She raised her hand to push a lock of hair from her face, tucking it behind her left ear. It was a small, insignificant gesture to anyone else. But for David, it was as if someone had stabbed a knife into his chest. That gesture, that exact movement. He had seen it 1,000 times. His heart began to beat violently. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He turned his head sharply, squinting to see better through the polarized glass. The woman lifted her face to the sky, closing her eyes for an instant, as if asking for strength. And in that second, David recognized her. Sarah, his ex-wife. The woman who had disappeared from his life 8 years ago without saying goodbye, without leaving a note, without giving an explanation. The woman he had loved, with an intensity he never thought possible. The woman he had searched for months, until private detectives told him there was no trace, that she had probably left the country or changed her identity. Sarah was alive, and she was on the street, asking for food. A car horn behind him pulled him out of his paralysis. The traffic light was green. David stepped on the gas without thinking, moved 20 yards and slammed on the brakes, leaving the SUV in a double-parked position. He ignored the shouts of the drivers, got out of the car like a whirlwind, and crossed the sidewalk, with long strides. As he got closer, the details became clearer and more painful. The deep, dark circles under her green eyes, the new lines on her forehead, the cracked hands with broken nails. And then he saw them, 2 children, sitting on the ground, leaning against the convenience store wall. 2 identical children, with light blonde hair, grayish-blue eyes, and a paleness that betrayed chronic hunger. They were splitting a ham sandwich in half, biting it slowly, savoring each bite as if it were the last. David stopped 10 feet away, unable to breathe. The children were approximately 7 years old, and they looked like him in a chilling way. The shape of the jaw, the curve of the eyebrows, the way the younger one frowned while eating, just like David did when he concentrated. Sarah looked up and their eyes met. The cardboard fell from her hands. Her face went from exhaustion to pure terror in 1 second. "David," she whispered, with a broken voice he barely recognized. "No, go. Away, please." But he could not move, he could not speak. He could only look at those 2 children, at those 2 little ghosts from his own past, and feel the world crumble beneath his feet. "What are their names?" he asked with a thread of a voice. Sarah closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her dirty cheek. "Alexander and Mark," she finally said. "The names your mother chose, before I disappeared. David felt his legs give out. He leaned against the building wall, his breath coming in gasps. Because those names, exactly those two names, he had heard from his mother one night of wine and nostalgia, when she confessed that if he ever had twin boys, he should name them that, in honor of her own deceased brothers. And Sarah knew it. The children were now looking at him with curiosity and some fear. The older one, probably Alexander, slowly stood up and placed himself in front of his brother, shielding him with his small body. "Who is it, Mom?" he asked in a hoarse voice. Sarah did not answer. She only sobbed in silence, her hands covering her face. David took a step forward, and another, until he was in front of them, kneeling on the dirty sidewalk, looking into the eyes of the two sons he never knew he had. And in that instant, everything his life had been up to that moment, the business, the money, the success, the elegant loneliness, became insignificant. David did not know how long he had been kneeling on that sidewalk. Passers-by kept walking around him, some looking with curiosity, others with indifference. The noise of the traffic seemed distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. Alexander and Mark watched him with a mix of distrust and fascination. Neither of them had let go of the half-eaten sandwich. "Let's go, Mum," whispered Mark, the younger one, pulling Sarah's torn sleeve. She nodded, wiping the tears with the back of her hand, but she did not move. She seemed paralyzed, like a cornered animal that does not know whether to run or surrender. David slowly raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said with a trembling voice. I need to understand." Sarah looked at him with those green eyes that he had loved so much, but now they were full of fear and shame. "There is nothing to understand," she replied in a whisper. "I did what I had to do. Disappear? Raise my sons on the street?" David felt rage beginning to cut through the shock. "Is that what you had to do? Do not yell." Sarah looked nervously at the children. "Please." David took a deep breath, trying to control himself. She was right. The children were already scared. He lowered his voice, but the intensity was still there. "Talk to me. Explain to me. Whatever. But do not ask me to leave as if I just did not discover that I have two sons." Sarah pressed her lips together. She looked at Alexander and Mark, who waited in silence with wide eyes. "Not here," she finally said. "Then tell me where." She hesitated. Then she signaled with her chin toward a small cafe across the street, a modest place with formica tables and faded signs in the windows. "There, but only if you promise that afterward you will let us go." David nodded, although he knew it was a lie. He was not going to let them go. Not now. Not ever. He stood up slowly and held out his hand to help her. Sarah ignored it, getting to her feet with effort, leaning on the wall. She took Mark by one hand and Alexander by the other. "Come on. Children, we are going to get something warm." The three crossed the street behind David, who walked ahead like an automaton, trying to process what was happening. Inside the cafe, he chose a table in the back, away from the windows. Sarah and the children sat together on one side, he on the other. A waitress approached, chewing gum. David ordered 4 hot chocolates and 4 omelette sandwiches. Sarah opened her mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. "Do not argue. Let me at least do this." When the waitress left, the silence fell like a slab. Mark and Alexander looked at the table timidly, their hands clasped. Sarah's eyes were fixed on the window, as if she wanted to be anywhere else. David waited until the waitress left the steaming chocolates on the table. The children looked at the cups with bright eyes, but they did not dare to touch them until Sarah nodded her head. Then they drank eagerly, staining their upper lip with foam. "When was the last time you ate something warm?" David asked, feeling a lump in his throat. "Yesterday," Sarah replied without looking at him. "At a soup kitchen, but there were many people, and it only lasted for Mark." Alexander looked up for the first time, looking directly at David with those eyes that were a mirror of his own. "I was not that hungry," he said in a serious voice, too serious for a 7-year-old. "Mark is smaller." David felt something break inside him. He bit his lip to keep from crying in front of them. "Now you can eat." "Everything you want," he said in a hoarse voice. "And tomorrow too, and the day after tomorrow." Sarah looked at him with distrust. "We do not need your charity." "It's not charity, Sarah. They are my sons." The words hung in the air like knives. The children looked at each other, confused. "What does that mean?" Mark asked with a trembling little voice. Sarah closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and took both children's hands. "It means that this man is your father." The silence that followed was so dense that David could hear the beating of his own heart. Alexander frowned, processing the information with that adult seriousness he had developed too soon. Mark simply blinked, not fully understanding. "Like the daddies of the other children?" he finally asked. "The ones who come to pick them up at school?" David swallowed hard. "Yes, like those. We do not go to school," Alexander said, looking at him with something like reproach. "Mom says that when we have a house, we will go again." Every word was a slap. David clenched his fists under the table, trying to maintain his composure. "Sarah," he said in a grave voice, "tell me why. Tell me why you did this to me." She looked up, and for the first time in 8 years, she really looked at him. There was so much pain in her eyes that David felt like he was drowning. "Because I saw you sign those papers," she whispered. "The papers where your business partner proposed using me as a trophy wife to close the deal with the foreign investors. I read how they planned to show me off at dinners, at events, as if I were just another accessory to your success." David felt his blood run cold. "I never signed those papers. I tore them up in front of him. I ended the partnership with him for daring to suggest such a thing. I only saw the first page," Sarah admitted with a broken voice. "It was on your desk. It said, 'Marital Image Agreement, Project Al-Rashid.' I saw my name. I saw figures. And I panicked. And you did not think to ask me, to give me a chance to explain." Tears rolled down Sarah's cheeks, leaving clean trails on her dirty skin. "I was pregnant, David. I had just found out that very morning, and all I thought was that I did not want to bring children into a world where their mother was a commercial object. So I ran away. I took what little I had and disappeared." David closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 8 years of misunderstanding crushing him. "Did you ever look for me?" she asked in a low voice. "For 6 months I did nothing else. I hired detectives, moved contacts, checked hospitals, records, security cameras, but it was as if you had evaporated. Finally I had to accept that you did not want to be found." "I did not," Sarah admitted. "I changed my name, worked under the table, moved constantly. At first it was easy. Then the children were born, and everything became complicated. Cheap boarding houses became too expensive. Temporary jobs were not enough, and slowly we fell. Why did you not come back? When things got difficult, why did you not come back?" Sarah looked at him with a mixture of pride and shame. "Because I was afraid you would take my sons from me, afraid your money would speak louder than my love, afraid of becoming nothing." The sandwiches arrived and the children ate in silence, listening without fully understanding. David watched them, memorizing every gesture, every expression, trying to recover the 7 years he had lost. "I want a chance," he finally said. 1 month, just 1 month to get to know them, to show them that I am not the man you thought I was. And after that we will decide together what is best for them." Sarah hesitated, biting her lower lip the way he remembered so well. "I do not have the energy to fight you, David, and they deserve something better than sleeping on the street. But if you try to take them away from me, I will not. I promise you." He did not know if it was true. He did not know what he would do when that month ended. But in that moment, all that mattered was that those children slept in a warm bed that night, and that he had a chance to be the father he should have been from the beginning. David's apartment was in the luxury district, in an early 20th century building elegantly restored. 3 bedrooms, high ceilings with original moldings, oak floors, windows overlooking a quiet square with ancient trees. A home for a lonely man who had stopped, expecting company. When the elevator stopped on the 3rd floor and the doors opened, Mark and Alexander were frozen in the carpeted hallway, looking at everything with wide eyes. Sarah walked behind them, her back rigid and her arms crossed, as if she were preparing for a battle. David opened the solid wood door and stepped aside. "Go ahead. This will be your home for the next month." The children did not move. They looked at their mother, waiting for permission. She nodded slightly, and they entered slowly as if stepping on glass. The apartment smelled of polished wood and old books. The afternoon light entered through the large windows, illuminating a minimalist but warm space. Hazelnut-colored leather sofas, bookshelves full of books, some black and white photographs on the walls. Mark pointed to a blue ceramic vase on a console table. "Is that very expensive?" he asked in a whisper. David smiled sadly. "It does not matter if it is. You can touch whatever you want. This is no longer just my house." Alexander walked to the window and looked out at the square. There were children playing soccer in a small playground, running and laughing with that freedom he had not known in a long time. "Can we go down and play there sometime?" he asked without turning around. "You can go down whenever you want," David replied, approaching slowly. "Tomorrow itself, if you want." Sarah remained by the door, as if she feared it would close and she would be trapped. David noticed and pointed to the hallway. "There are 2 guest bedrooms. You can choose the one you prefer. The children can share one or each have their own." "We want to be together," Mark said immediately, taking his brother's hand. "We always sleep together." David nodded, feeling a pinch in his chest. Of course they slept together. They had probably protected each other through all those cold nights in shelters and unknown streets. "Then the big room will be for the 2 of you. It has 2 beds. And the other one will be for your mother." He showed them the entire apartment. The kitchen with granite countertops that Sarah looked at as if it were a museum. The master bathroom with a jacuzzi tub that made the children let out their first timid smile of the day. And finally the bedrooms. The one they chose for the children had cream walls, 2 single beds with white comforters, a wooden desk, and an empty bookshelf waiting to be filled. When Mark saw the beds, he ran and dropped onto one of them, burying his face in the pillow. "It's soft," he mumbled with a choked voice. "Mum, it's so soft." Sarah turned around quickly, but not before David saw the tears rolling down her face. She left the room without saying a word. David followed her into the hallway. "Sarah, do not say anything," she whispered with a trembling voice. "Do not say how good this feels, because then I will completely break down." "Then break down. You can do it here. You are safe." She shook her head, angrily wiping away the tears. "I am not safe. I have never been. And as soon as I lower my guard, you will take everything I have left from me. I am not going to take anything from you. I already told you. Men like you always take what they want." The phrase hung between them like a poison. David took a deep breath, trying not to take it as a personal attack. "I am going to prepare some dinner. You should shower and rest. Tomorrow, we will talk more calmly." He did not wait for an answer. He went back to the kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and stared at the contents without really seeing anything. There was French champagne, expensive cheeses, gourmet products that now seemed obscene to him. Finally, he took out eggs, potatoes, and onion. He would make an omelette. Something simple. Something that Sarah used to cook in the early days of their marriage, when they still lived in that small apartment and were happy with little. While he cooked, he heard the sound of running water. The shower. He imagined those 2 children discovering hot water after who knows how long, and he had to stop for a moment, leaning on the counter, fighting back tears. 40 minutes later, the 4 of them were sitting at the dining table. Mark and Alexander wore David's old pajamas that were huge on them, with the sleeves and pants rolled up. Sarah had also showered and wore a clean shirt and sweatpants that David had found in a closet, probably from some ex-girlfriend he no longer even remembered. With her hair wet and combed back, without the layer of dirt she had accumulated on the street, David could see the Sarah he had known 8 years ago. She was still beautiful, although thinner, more drawn, with lines of suffering etched on her face. They ate in silence at first. The children devoured the omelette as if it were the best banquet in the world. David only watched them, still unable to believe that they were there, at his table, eating his food. "Do you have a television?" Mark suddenly asked, with a bit of omelette at the corner of his lips. "Yes, in the living room. Can we watch it after dinner?" David looked at Sarah, who nodded almost imperceptibly. "Of course. We can watch whatever you want." They finished dinner, and David set up the sofa with blankets and cushions. He put on a cartoon channel, and the children snuggled together, their eyes shining with joy at the images on the big screen. Sarah sat at the other end of the sofa, watchful, tense. David stood, leaning on the door frame, watching. That domestic scene, so simple and common for millions of families, was a miracle and a condemnation for him. A miracle because he was finally getting to know his sons. A condemnation because he had lost 7 irreparable years. When the children started to yawn, Sarah took them to the bedroom. David heard their voices mumbling, the sound of the blankets being arranged, and finally silence. She came out of the room, closing the door softly. "Thank you," she said in a low voice. "For this, for today, you do not have to thank me for anything." "Yes, I do. Even if I do not trust you, I know that this is more than I have been able to give them in a long time." David wanted to approach her, but he held back. There was still too much distance between them, too much unhealed pain. "Sarah, I need you to tell me the truth. During these 8 years, did you ever think of me? Did you ever want to come back?" She stayed still for a long moment. Then she slowly nodded. "Every day, every damn day I thought of you. But fear was always stronger than love. And now I am too tired to be afraid. I just want my sons to be well, even if that means losing them." David took a step toward her, and this time Sarah did not back away. "You are not going to lose them, I swear it. We will find a way to do this together." She looked at him with those eyes full of held-back tears. "Why are you so good, David? After everything I did to you, why do not you hate me? Because you are still the woman I loved, and because those children carry my blood, and because life already took enough time from us, I am not going to lose another second in grudges." Sarah covered her face with her hands and finally broke down. David hugged her, feeling her body tremble against his, listening to her choked sobs, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt that maybe, just maybe, there was a possibility of healing. The first 3 days were like walking on broken glass. David took an indefinite leave from his company, something his partners received with surprise and concern. He had never taken more than a week off in 10 years, but now, nothing mattered more than those 2 children who ate breakfast in his kitchen every morning with a mix of shyness and curiosity. Alexander was the most reserved. He sat up straight in the chair, ate slowly, answered with single words when David asked him questions, but his eyes followed him. Around the room, observing, analyzing, judging. He was the protector, the one who had learned to distrust the world. Mark was different, more open, more willing to smile, although also more fragile. On the 3rd day, while David was preparing breakfast, Mark approached shyly and asked if he could help. "Of course," David said, holding back his emotion. "Do you want to beat the eggs?" Mark nodded enthusiastically, and David gave him a fork and a bowl. The child beat awkwardly, sticking out his tongue in concentration, and David had to blink several times to hold back the tears. "You are doing very well," he said in a hoarse voice. "Mum says I am good at cooking. Someday I want to have a restaurant." "Yes? What kind of food would you make?" "Food for people who are hungry. Free. So no one has to sleep on an empty stomach." David felt his heart break in 2. He knelt down to Mark's height and looked him in the eyes. "That is the noblest thing I have heard in a long time, and I will help. You achieve it, okay?" Mark smiled genuinely for the first time, and David saw in that smile all the pain and all the hope in the world. But not everything was easy. Sarah was still a tense and watchful presence. She barely spoke to David, only what was strictly necessary. She slept with her door locked. When David tried to approach the children, she immediately appeared, like a guard dog protecting its territory. On the 4th night, after putting Mark and Alexander to bed, David confronted her. In the kitchen. "You cannot keep going like this, Sarah. You cannot be on constant alert. The children feel it. The children are fine." "No, they are not. Alexander barely looks at me, and every time I try to play with them, you show up with some excuse to take them away." Sarah put down the teacup she was preparing and looked at him coldly. "Because I do not trust you. Not yet. What do I have to do to earn it? What else can I show you?" "I do not know, David. I do not know." Silence spread, between them heavy and suffocating. Finally David sighed and sat down in one of the kitchen chairs. "Do you know what the hardest part of all this is? It's not that you left me. It's not that you disappeared. It's knowing that for 7 years, while I was signing contracts and making money and living in this comfortable bubble, my sons were sleeping on the street, that they were cold, that they were hungry, and I was not there to protect them." Sarah felt something inside her soften. She sat, down across from him, keeping her distance, but for the first time truly listening. "It was not your fault," she said in a low voice. "It was mine. I made that decision. I condemned them to that life. Why, Sarah? Why did you not seek help? Why did you not go to social services, to an NGO, anywhere? She closed her eyes, and when she opened them, they were full of shame. Because I was afraid they would take them away, that they would say I was not fit to care for them, that they would take them to foster families, and I would lose them forever. I preferred to see them suffer by my side than to lose them, and now I see how selfish that was. David reached his hand across the table, but did not touch her. You were not selfish. You were a desperate mother trying to protect her children the only way she knew how, but you are not alone anymore, Sarah. You do not have to do everything yourself anymore. I just do not know how not to. For 8 years, all I have done is survive. I do not know how to live. Then we will learn together. It was a small moment, a fragile instant of connection in the midst of the chaos, but it was enough for Sarah, for the first time since she had seen David again, to feel that maybe, just maybe, she was not completely lost. The next day, David took the children to the park. Sarah insisted on going with them, but David convinced her to stay home and rest. He needed time alone with Alexander and Mark. They walked through the streets of the wealthy neighborhood, the children looking at everything with huge eyes, the luxury stores, the expensive cars, the elegant women with their purebred dogs. When they arrived at the large city park, Mark ran toward the ducks in the pond with a childlike joy that had remained dormant for too long. Alexander stayed next to David, his hands in the pockets of his new jacket. "Why did you leave us?" he suddenly asked, without looking at him. The question fell like a stone. David knelt down to his height. "I did not leave you, Alexander. I did not even know you existed. Your mother left before she could tell me she was pregnant. She says she was afraid of you. I know, and I understand why, but I never would have hurt her, or you." Alexander looked at him directly for the first time, scrutinizing his face as if looking for lies. "Are you going to take us away from her?" "No, I would never do that. Do you promise?" David felt the weight of that promise, knowing it might be the hardest thing he had ever promised in his life. "I promise." Alexander slowly nodded. He did not smile. He did not relax. But something in his posture changed slightly, as if an invisible armor loosened just a little. They spent the afternoon in the park. David bought them ice cream and watched them run among the trees, chasing each other and laughing. It was a sound he had not heard before, and it was engraved in his memory as the most beautiful he had ever heard. When they returned to the apartment, Sarah was waiting for them at the door. Her expression changed when she saw the children smiling, their cheeks rosy and their eyes bright. "We had a great time, Mum," Mark said, hugging her. "We saw ducks and squirrels, and David bought us 3-flavor ice cream." Sarah looked at David over Mark's head. For the first time, there was no distrust in her eyes, only silent, painful gratitude. And David knew they had crossed the first threshold. There were still many walls to break down, many wounds to heal, but they had started. It was a small beginning, but it was enough. The second week brought the first real challenge. David had discreetly hired a private pediatrician to examine the children without asking uncomfortable questions. Dr. Ramirez arrived one morning with a black briefcase and a kind smile that did not manage to hide his professional concern. The children were thin, too thin for their age. They had nutritional deficiencies, mild anemia, and some dental problems that would require treatment. But the most worrying were the emotional scars that the doctor could not diagnose with a stethoscope. "They have lived in a state of chronic stress," Dr. Ramirez explained to David and Sarah in private. "Their bodies are in constant survival mode. They will need time, stability, and probably psychological support." Sarah bit her lip until it bled. David put a hand on her shoulder, and this time she did not pull away. "We will do whatever is necessary," he said. The doctor nodded and left a list of vitamins, supplements, and recommendations. He also gave them the contact information for a child psychologist specializing in trauma. After the doctor left, Sarah collapsed on the sofa. "I did this to them," she whispered. "I did this to them." "No," David said firmly. "Life did this to them. Circumstances did this to them. You did everything you could. It was not enough. But now we can do more. Together." That afternoon, while the children were taking a nap, David started something he had been postponing. He opened his laptop and began to search for information about fatherhood, about how to connect with children who have experienced trauma, about how to be the father he had never learned to be. His own father had been a distant man, successful in business but absent at home. David had sworn not to repeat that pattern, but now he realized that he did not know how to be different. He did not have a map, a manual. He only had instinct and the desperate desire to do it right. Sarah appeared in the study doorway without making a sound. "What are you doing?" "Learning," he replied without looking away from the screen. "Reading about how not to mess everything up." She came closer and looked over his shoulder. On the screen were articles about conscious parenting, about healing attachment, about building trust. "I never thought you cared so much," she admitted softly. "Why not?" "They are my sons." Because most men would have demanded paternity tests, lawyers, legal battles. You simply took them in." David turned in the chair to look at her. "Because when I saw them, when I looked into their eyes, I did not need any proof. They are in every gesture, every expression. They are mine, Sarah. And even if it cost me my entire fortune, even if I had to give up everything I have, I would not let them go." Sarah felt tears threaten to spill over again. She turned around quickly, but David caught up to her. "Do not run away. You do not have to run away from me anymore." "I just do not know how to do this," she confessed, finally letting down the barriers. "I do not know how to trust. I do not know how to let someone else take care of them. I have been alone so long that I forgot what it was like to share." "Then let's start slowly, step by step, no pressure." Sarah nodded, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. David offered her a tissue, and she accepted it with a shaky smile. "Do you know what I missed about you?" She suddenly said, "Your patience. You were always incredibly patient, even when I was unbearable." "You were never unbearable." "Yes, I was. I was 22. I was impulsive, dramatic. I do not know how you put up with me. Because I loved you, and because I saw something in you that I had never found in anyone else, pure honesty. You never pretended to be something you were not." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Look what that honesty brought us. 8 lost years." "Not lost," David corrected her. "Deferred. And now we have a chance to recover some of that time." That night after dinner, David proposed watching a movie all together. They chose an animation about a fish that gets lost and a father who crosses the ocean to find him. Halfway through the movie, David felt a weight on his side. Mark had fallen asleep against him, his head resting on his arm. David did not move. He barely breathed, fearing to wake him. He looked at Sarah, who was watching the scene with bright eyes. Alexander, sitting on the other side, was also looking, not at the movie but at his brother sleeping next to this man who claimed to be his father. When the movie ended, David carefully lifted Mark. The child mumbled something unintelligible and snuggled against his chest. That simple gesture of trust was more valuable to David than any $1 million contract he had ever signed. He carried him to the bedroom, gently laid him down, and pulled the blankets up to his chin. Mark opened his eyes for a second, half asleep. "Dad," he murmured. It was barely a whisper, perhaps part of a dream, but for David, it was as if the entire universe had spoken. He left the room with shaky legs and leaned against the hallway wall, trying to control the emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. Sarah was there waiting. "I heard it," she said softly. "Me too. He's starting to trust you, and that terrifies me more than anything. What if I disappoint him? What if I am not the father they need?" Sarah took a step toward him, and for the first time in 8 years, she touched his face tenderly. "You already are. You just have to believe it." And in that instant, in that dark hallway, with the sound of 2 children sleeping peacefully in the next room, David and Sarah looked at each other and saw something they had lost a long time ago: hope. The following weeks brought a routine that none of them had known before. David woke up early, prepared breakfast while Sarah helped the children get dressed. Then they spent the mornings doing activities together: walks in the park, visits to children-friendly museums, quiet days at home where the children rediscovered the joy of being children. Alexander remained cautious, but began to ask questions. Questions about David's work, about his childhood, about what life was like before they were born. David answered honestly, hiding nothing, building bridges with words. Mark, on the other hand, had blossomed. His laughter filled the apartment. He jumped on the sofa when he thought no one was watching. He told David elaborate stories about dragons and knights that he invented himself. And every night when David tucked him in, he hugged him tightly and whispered, "Good night, Dad," with a naturalness that made David's heart swell with gratitude. But not everything was simple. There were difficult moments, nights when Mark woke up screaming from nightmares about the cold and hunger, mornings when Alexander retreated into an impenetrable silence, staring out the window with eyes that had seen too much, afternoons when Sarah broke down in the bathroom, crying for all the lost time. One afternoon, while Mark and Alexander were playing in their room, David found Sarah sitting on the balcony, smoking a cigarette she had bought that morning. He did not know she had started smoking again. "Since when?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "For 3 years. When things got really bad, it helped calm my nerves. You should quit, for your health." Sarah laughed without humor. "My health is the least of it, David. My health is ruined anyway." "Do not say that. It's true. My lungs are weak from all the nights sleeping in the cold. I have back problems from carrying the children for miles, and I have chronic anxiety that will probably never go away." David took the cigarette from her fingers and put it out. "Then we will go to a doctor. We will get you complete checkups, whatever you need." "I do not need your salvation, David. I am not trying to save you. I am trying to take care of you. Why is it so hard for you to accept help?" Sarah turned to look at him, her eyes bright. "Because for 8 years, all I had was my pride. If I lose that too, I have nothing left. You have us left, the children, and me if you let me." She slowly shook her head. "You never really loved me, David. I was young, pretty, different from the women in your circle. I was an adventure, a rebellion. That is not true, and you know it. Then why did you marry me? Why did a successful man with so many options choose a 22-year-old waitress without a college education?" David took a deep breath. It was a question he had been expecting for years. "Because when I looked at you, the world made sense. Because you made me laugh. Because you did not care about my money or my last name. Because when I was with you, I felt like myself, not a polished version of what I was supposed to be. And because I loved you with an intensity that scared me." Sarah felt something within her break. All the defenses she had so carefully built began to crumble. "I cannot love you again," she whispered. "I cannot allow myself that risk. I am not asking you to. I am just asking you to let me be here. For the children, for you if you want. No expectations, no pressures." Sarah closed her eyes, letting the tears roll freely. "Why do you have to be so good? Why can't you be the monster I needed you to be?" David smiled sadly. "Because monsters do not exist, Sarah. There are only people trying to do the best they can with the cards they were dealt." That night, after putting the children to bed, David and Sarah stayed in the living room, each at one end of the sofa, drinking tea and talking. They talked about everything. The first days of their relationship, how they met at that bar where she worked, how he had come back 5 nights in a row just to see her smile. They talked about the small, intimate wedding they had had, only with close friends and David's mother. They talked about the plans they had made, to travel the world, to have children someday, to build a life together. And they talked about how everything had fallen apart in an instant, because of a misunderstanding, because of fear, because of a lack of communication. "Do you know what hurts the most?" Sarah said, when the clock was almost midnight. "That we could have had this life, these moments, and we lost them because of my cowardice. It was not cowardice, it was survival. You did what you thought was necessary, but I was wrong. And now I have 2 sons who grew up without a father because I was too proud to ask for help." David moved closer and took her hand. She did not pull it away. "But we are here now, and that has to count for something." Sarah nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. "Yes, that counts." The next morning, David surprised them with a proposal. "I want you to come with me somewhere." "Where?" Mark asked with curiosity. "It's a surprise." They drove for half an hour until they reached a residential area on the outskirts of the city. David stopped the car in front of a 2-story house with a garden and a small pool. The children pressed their faces against the car windows, looking in amazement. "Whose house is this?" Alexander asked. "Mine," David replied. "Well, technically my company's. I bought it years ago as an investment, but I never did anything with it. I thought it might be perfect." "For you?" Sarah looked at him in disbelief. "David, no, we cannot. I am not saying you have to move now. I just want you to see it, to know that you have options, that when you are ready, If you ever want a space of your own, but still be close to me, it's here." They got out of the car and David showed them the inside. It was perfect. 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, a garden where the children could play. It was empty, needed renovation, but it had potential. Mark ran through the garden, chasing imaginary butterflies. Alexander explored every corner with his characteristic seriousness, and Sarah walked slowly through the house, touching the walls, looking out the windows, imagining a life that seemed too good to be true. "Why are you doing this?" she asked David when they were alone in the kitchen. "Because I want you to know that you have a future, that you are not trapped, that you have options. But this is too much. It's what? Too generous? Too good to be true? Sarah, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Why not use it on something that really matters?" Sarah felt emotion choking her. She leaned on the counter, trying to maintain her composure. "My whole life I have fought alone. I have carried everything on my shoulders. And now you show up and you want to fix everything. And I do not know how to deal with that." David approached slowly. "I am not trying to fix everything. I am just trying to be here, to be part of your lives, to be the father I should have been from the beginning." "And what about us?" she asked in a low voice. "You and me? I do not know. Maybe nothing, maybe something, but we will decide that over time, with no pressure." Sarah nodded, wiping away the tears that had begun to fall. "All right, we will see what happens." And for the first time in 8 years, Sarah felt that maybe, just maybe, the future could be something more than simple survival. The first major obstacle came in the 3rd week. David had arranged an appointment with the child psychologist that Dr. Ramirez had recommended. Dr. Sofia Mendoza had her practice in a modern building with a waiting room painted in soft colors and carefully selected toys. Alexander flatly refused to go in. "I am not crazy," he said firmly, crossing his arms. "I do not need to go to any psychologist." "No one says you are crazy, honey," Sarah said, kneeling in front of him. "The doctor just wants to talk to you, help you feel better." "I feel fine." "That is not true," Mark intervened softly. "You have nightmares every night, and sometimes you stare at the wall for hours." Alexander glared at his brother. "Shut up. You do not know anything." David approached and sat down in one of the waiting room chairs, getting down to Alexander's level. "You know what? I went to a psychologist once too, after your mother disappeared, because I felt lost and sad, and I did not know how to handle those feelings." Alexander looked at him in surprise. "Really? Really? And it helped me a lot. It does not make you weak to ask for help, Alexander. On the contrary, it makes you brave." The boy hesitated, biting his lower lip the same way Sarah did when she was nervous. "Are you going to go in with me?" "If you want, yes." Alexander slowly nodded. David held out his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, the boy took it. The session with Dr. Mendoza was revealing. In that safe space, with toys and drawings, Alexander began to release small fragments of his story. He talked about the nights in shelters where drunk men shouted, about the times he had to defend Mark from bigger children who wanted to take their food, about how he learned to sleep with one eye open because he trusted no one. David listened from his chair in the corner, his heart breaking with every word. When Alexander finished speaking, his eyes were red, but he had not cried. He still clung to that iron control. Dr. Mendoza recommended weekly sessions for both children and also suggested family therapy. "You are building something new," she told David and Sarah afterward, "but on fragile foundations. You need to learn to be a family together." That afternoon, back at the apartment, Alexander approached David while he was preparing dinner. "Can I help?" It was the first time he had asked. David felt a lump in his throat. "Of course. Do you want to cut the vegetables?" They worked in silence for a while, side by side. Finally, Alexander spoke. "Thank you for coming with me today. You do not have to thank me, that is what fathers are for. But you are not really my father. Well, you are, but you were not there." David put down the knife and turned to him. "You are right. I was not there, and that is something I will have to live with for the rest of my life. But I am here now, Alexander, and I plan to stay, if you allow me." The boy looked at him with those grayish-blue eyes, so much like his own. "Even if it is difficult, even if I am difficult, especially then." Alexander slowly nodded. He did not smile, but his posture relaxed a little. It was enough. The following days brought more challenges. Sarah received a call from an old acquaintance who had seen her photo on social media. David had posted an innocent picture of the children in the park without thinking about the consequences, and the questions began. Where had she been? Why had she disappeared? Whose children were those? Sarah panicked. David had to delete all their social media and talk to his contacts to maintain discretion, but the damage was done. Sarah locked herself in her room for hours, reliving old fears. When she finally came out, her eyes were swollen from crying. "I cannot do this," she told David. "I cannot live looking over my shoulder all the time." "You do not have to. No one is going to judge you, Sarah. Everyone will judge me. They will say I am a bad mother, that I abandoned my sons, that I am a failure. And what does it matter what they say? The only thing that matters is what you know. And you know you did everything possible. Did I? Because sometimes I look in the mirror and I see a stranger. I see someone I do not recognize, someone who let her children sleep on the street." David took her by the shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "That woman you see in the mirror is a survivor. She is someone who fought the entire world to keep her sons safe. She is someone who deserves respect, not condemnation. I do not feel respectable. Then let me feel it for you until you can feel it yourself." Sarah broke down against him, crying with sobs that seemed to come from the deepest part of her being. David held her, feeling his own pain mixing with hers, two rivers of suffering converging in the same channel. That night, after Sarah fell asleep exhausted on the sofa, David stayed awake in his study, looking at old documents. He found the contract that his business partner had presented to him 8 years ago. He read it completely for the first time in a long time, feeling nausea rise in his throat. It was worse than he remembered. It not only proposed using Sarah as a trophy wife to impress conservative investors, but it included clauses about her appearance, her behavior, even her way of dressing. It was degrading, dehumanizing, and Sarah had only seen the first page before running away. David understood then the magnitude of her terror. It had not just been fear, it had been absolute horror at the possibility of being reduced to a decorative object. He took the document, carried it to the fireplace he never used, found a box of matches, and burned it. He watched the pages twist and blacken, feeling a somber satisfaction as he saw that nightmare from the past disappear. The next day he showed the ashes to Sarah. "It was garbage then, and it is ashes now. None of that was real. None of that represented me." Sarah looked at the burned remains and felt an ancient weight lift from her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. And although it did not solve everything, although 1,000 wounds remained to be healed, it was one more step toward healing. The month David had asked for was coming to an end. 28 days of learning to be a family, of building broken bridges, of healing in silence. But now they had to make decisions. One afternoon, while the children were playing in the park with other neighborhood children, David and Sarah sat on a bench, under a tree. "The month ends in 2 days," she said softly. "I know. And now what?" David took a deep breath. "Now we ask them what they want. It is their lives too." That night, after dinner, the 4 of them sat in the living room. Mark snuggled next to Sarah. Alexander maintained his characteristic distance, but his posture was more relaxed than before. "We have to talk about something important," David began. "You know that this month was a test, to get to know each other, to see if we could be a family." "And we can't anymore?" Mark asked in a trembling voice. "Yes, we can," Sarah said quickly. "But we have to decide how." Alexander looked at David directly. "Do you want us to stay? More than anything in the world? And can Mom stay too?" David looked at Sarah, and in his eyes there was a silent promise. "Of course. We are a family. I am not going to separate you." Mark began to cry with relief. Alexander closed his eyes, and a solitary tear rolled down his cheek. Sarah hugged them both, also sobbing. "So can we stay here?" Mark asked through tears. "In this house with the soft beds and the hot chocolate?" "You can stay as long as you want," David replied. "Or we can renovate the other house, the one I showed you. Make it perfect for you." "And would you come with us?" Alexander asked. "If you want me there, yes." The children looked at each other with that silent communication that only twins share. Then Alexander spoke. "We want both houses. We want to be here sometimes, and in the other house other times. And we want you and Mum to be together." Sarah and David looked at each other, surprised by the maturity of the request. "That is more complicated," Sarah said softly. "Why?" Mark asked. "You love each other. We see it." The brutal honesty of a 7-year-old left both adults speechless. David held out his hand to Sarah. She looked at it for a long moment before taking it. "Maybe we can try," she finally said. Slowly. "No promises." "No promises," David agreed. "Just one day at a time." That night, after putting the children to bed, David and Sarah stayed on the balcony looking at the city lights. "Do you really think we can make this work?" she asked. "I do not know, but I want to try. For them, and for us." Sarah turned to look at him. 8 years have passed, David. We are different people. Maybe. Or maybe we are the same people we always were, just with more scars. She smiled sadly. "I have too many scars. And I have. Time to get to know each one of them." It was a small, intimate moment, loaded with possibilities, and when David slowly leaned toward her, Sarah did not pull away. The kiss was soft, tentative, full of unanswered questions, but it was also full of hope. The decision was made. They would stay together. But now they had to face the outside world. David had to explain the sudden appearance of an ex-wife and 2 children to his family and partners. Sarah had to face her own ghosts, including the shame of being seen by people who had known her before. The first test came when David's mother, Catherine, asked to meet her grandsons. She was an elegant 68-year-old woman with perfectly styled silver hair and a look that could freeze or warm depending on her mood. She arrived at the apartment on a Sunday morning with gifts for the children, expensive clothes, educational toys, books, but her expression was unreadable. "So these are my grandsons," she said, looking at Mark and Alexander intensely. The children hid behind Sarah, intimidated. David made the formal introductions, noting the tension in his mother's body. "Alexander, Mark, this is your grandmother, Catherine. Mum, these are your grandsons." Catherine knelt down with difficulty, ignoring protocol, and opened her arms. "Come, let me see you well." Mark was the first to approach, always the more confident. Catherine hugged him tightly, and David saw tears in her eyes. "You have your grandfather's eyes," she whispered. "The same blue eyes." Alexander approached more slowly, but when Catherine hugged him too, something in him broke. He clung to her, as if she were a lifeline. Then Catherine stood up and faced Sarah. The silence was tense. "I am not going to ask you where you were," Catherine finally said, "or why you left. That is between you and my son. But I will tell you this. Those children are my blood, and I am going to be in their lives, whether you like it or not." "That is fine with me," Sarah replied, lifting her chin. "They need all the family they can get." Catherine nodded, and something akin to respect crossed her face. "Good. Then let's start over." Lunch was less awkward than expected. Catherine told stories about David's childhood that made the children laugh. David and Sarah shared knowing glances, and for the first time it began to feel like a real family. When Catherine left, she hugged David at the door. "Do not let her go again," she whispered, "and do not let her leave. You have lost enough time." The next test was work. David could not continue with indefinite leave. He had responsibilities, contracts, meetings, but now he also had 2 sons who needed stability. He spoke with his partners and restructured his schedule. He would work from home 3 days a week. He would delegate more. He would prioritize differently. Some understood. Others thought he had gone crazy, but David did not owe explanations to anyone. Sarah, for her part, began to think about her own future. She had been surviving for so long that she had forgotten to dream. But now, with stability, old passions began to emerge. "I always wanted to study," she confessed to David one night. "Psychology or social work, to help other people in situations like mine." "Then do it. Enroll in college." "But the children?" "They have a father now, and a grandmother who already told me she wants to spend more time with them." "You can study, Sarah." She looked at him in disbelief. "Are you really serious?" "Completely serious." For the first time in years, Sarah felt that her life could be something more than simple survival. She could grow. She could dream. The following months brought profound changes. Sarah enrolled in an adult education program to complete her high school degree. The children started school, with additional support to catch up on what they had missed. And David learned to balance work with fatherhood. It was not perfect. There were bad days. Days when Alexander retreated into himself again. Days when Mark had nightmares so strong that only Sarah could calm him. Days when David came home late from work and missed dinner. Days when Sarah felt she was not enough. But there were also good days. Days when the four of them cooked together and ended up with flour in their hair. Days when David taught the children to ride a bike in the park. Days when Sarah and David stayed up talking like they did years ago. Days when the children surprised them with drawings that said, "My family." One afternoon, 6 months after that encounter, David took Alexander to his office. The boy had expressed curiosity about his father's work, and David saw an opportunity. The office was impressive. A full floor in a modern building, city views, efficient staff. Alexander walked next to David with wide eyes, observing everything. "Is all this yours?" he asked. "It belongs to the company, but yes, I am one of the owners." "And what exactly do you do?" David sat at his desk and explained patiently. "Real estate investments, project development, property management." Alexander listened carefully, asking intelligent questions. "Do you ever help poor people?" he finally asked. "People like we were?" The question hit David in the chest. "Not as much as I should," he admitted. "But I could." "Why do you ask?" "Because there are many people out there still. Families sleeping on the street. Children who are cold and hungry. And if you have so much money, you could help." David looked at his son, at that 8-year-old boy with a wisdom that came from suffering, and felt absolute clarity. "You are right. What if you help me? What if we do something together?" Alexander's eyes lit up. Really, really. And so the project that would change everything was born. David created a foundation dedicated to homeless families, with a special emphasis on single mothers with children. Temporary housing, psychological support, help finding work, educational programs for the children. Sarah got involved too, sharing her story with other women, offering the perspective of someone who had been there. Her testimony was powerful, without shame, full of truth. Mark designed a logo for the foundation, 2 intertwined hands forming a heart. It was simple but perfect, and Alexander, that serious boy who had had to grow up too fast, finally found a way to channel everything he had lived through into something positive. The family grew in ways they did not expect. Catherine became a constant presence, picking the children up from school, teaching them to cook family recipes, telling them stories about their ancestors. Sarah and David did not rush to marry again. They did not need a piece of paper to know they were together. They lived in the apartment during the week and spent weekends in the renovated house, which now had a garden full of flowers that the children helped tend. One night, Sarah woke up and found David awake on the balcony. "What's wrong?" she asked, wrapping herself in a blanket. "I was thinking about that day, when I saw you on the street. What would have happened if I had been looking at my phone, if I had not looked up at that exact moment?" Sarah approached and hugged him from behind. "But you did look, and you found us. The rest is just speculation. We lost 8 years, Sarah. I know, but we gained the rest of our lives." David turned and kissed her, feeling gratitude and love mixing into something that had no name but was absolutely real. 1 year after the reunion, the moment that David had been postponing arrived. He needed to close the circle with his former business partner, Robert, whose grotesque proposal had been the catalyst for everything. Robert was now a successful businessman in his own right, with offices downtown and a reputation for being ruthless in business. When David asked to see him, Robert accepted with curiosity. They met at a neutral cafe. Robert arrived in his expensive suit and his shark smile. "David, long time no see. I heard you had gone soft. Family and charity foundations? Not your style." "People change," David replied calmly, "although apparently you do not." Robert shrugged. "Business is business. To what do I owe the honor?" David took out a folder and slid it across the table. They were copies of the documents Robert had prepared years ago, along with evidence of other similar proposals he had made to other investors. "Do you remember this? Your brilliant idea to use my wife as an accessory?" Robert's smile faltered slightly. "That was years ago. Water under the bridge. Not for me. That proposal destroyed my marriage. It made Sarah run away. It made my sons grow up on the street." Robert paled. "I did not know she was pregnant. If I had known—" "What?" Would you have been less despicable? I doubt you have that capacity. Look, I am sorry if there were consequences that I did not foresee, but I was just doing my job. David leaned forward, with a quiet intensity that was more threatening than any shout. I did not come here to destroy you, Robert, although I could. I came to tell you that I forgive you, because holding a grudge is like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies, and I have too much to lose to keep poisoning myself. He stood up and left money on the table. But be clear about this. If you cross my path, or my family's path again, I will not be so forgiving. Robert remained seated, for once in his life, speechless. David left the cafe feeling lighter. It was true, the forgiveness was not for Robert, it was for himself, to be able to move forward without that weight. That night, Sarah noticed something different in him. What happened? I saw Robert. I told him what I needed to say and I let him go. Sarah hugged him tightly. I am proud of you, for not hitting him, for being the man our sons need you to be, the one I need you to be. David looked at her with those eyes that had seen so much pain and so much joy. I love you, Sarah, I never stopped. I know, and I love you too, although it was hard for me to admit it, even to myself. They kissed with the urgency of two people who had lost too much time and were determined not to lose another second. Mark surprised them coming out of his room to get water. Are you kissing? He asked with a mischievous smile. Go back to bed, little spy, Sarah laughed. Does that mean you are a couple again? David and Sarah looked at each other and laughed. Yes, David said. I guess so. Mark gave a little jump of joy and ran to wake up Alexander with the news. 2 years after that encounter on Grand Avenue, life had found a natural rhythm. Alexander and Mark were 10 years old, outstanding students, and although Alexander maintained that thoughtful seriousness, both had learned to be simply children. Sarah had graduated from her program and was now studying social work at the university. She was the best in her class, with a unique perspective that came from having lived on both sides of the coin. David had found the perfect balance between business and family. The foundation prospered, helping hundreds of families every year. One spring afternoon, David prepared a surprise. He took Sarah to the same bar where they had met 13 years ago. The place had changed little. The same old tables, the same smell of beer and olives. Why here? Sarah asked, surprised. Because this is where everything began. And I want this to be where we make it official again. David knelt down, pulling out a small box, the same ring he had given her the first time, which Sarah had left in the apartment when she fled, and which David had kept all these years. Sarah, you are already my family in every way that matters, but I want to make it official, not for the paper, but for the promise. Will you marry me? Again. Tears were rolling down Sarah's cheeks. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They kissed under the dim lights of the bar while the other customers applauded, without really knowing the story behind that moment. The wedding was small, intimate in the garden of the family house. Catherine cried with happiness. Mark and Alexander were the groomsmen, serious and proud in their small suits. During the ceremony, it was Alexander who surprised everyone by asking to speak. I want to say something, he announced in a firm voice. David and Sarah nodded, curious. There was a time when we had nothing, when the world was cold and dark, but Mom never gave up. And when Dad found us, he did not judge us, he took us in, he gave us a home. So I want to thank them for teaching us that families do not always start perfect, but they can end perfect. There was not a dry eye among the guests. David hugged his son, feeling pride explode in his chest. I love you, son. I love you too, Dad. It was the first time Alexander had said it with complete freedom, without reservations, without fear, and it was the best gift David could have received. 5 years after that day on Grand Avenue, the Williams family was at the inauguration of the Foundation's new center, a complete building dedicated to homeless families with temporary apartments, a daycare, psychological support, and job training programs. Mark, now 12 years old, had insisted that the center's dining hall be special. It has to be a place where people feel valued, not like charity, he had said, like in a real restaurant. And so it was. Tables, with tablecloths, porcelain plates, home-cooked food served with dignity. Alexander had designed a mentor program where children who had been on the street helped others who were going through the same thing. Sarah headed the social integration department, using her story not as shame but as power. She gave talks at universities, at conferences, sharing her experience to change public policies. And David had found his true purpose, not in making money, but in using it to create real change. During the inauguration, a young woman with 2 small children approached Sarah. "Thank you," she said with a trembling voice. "We just arrived in the city. We have nowhere to go. And this is a miracle." Sarah hugged the woman, seeing in her a reflection of who she had been 7 years ago. "It's not a miracle, it is what everyone should have. Dignity, respect, an opportunity." The woman began to cry, and Sarah held her, whispering words of encouragement, of hope. David watched from afar with Mark and Alexander on each side. His sons were almost up to his shoulder now. Soon they would be teenagers, then adults. Time flew too fast. "Dad," Mark said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you ever regret everything that happened? The lost years, how things were so difficult?" David thought carefully before answering. "I regret the lost time, but I do not regret where it led us, because it made us stronger. It taught us what really matters." Alexander, always the more thoughtful, added, "I think bad things are sometimes necessary for good things to be possible." David looked at his son with amazement. At 12 years old, he already had a wisdom that many adults never achieved. "Exactly, son. Exactly." That night, back home, the 4 of them sat in the garden looking at the stars. It was a tradition they had developed. 1 night a week, no technology, just conversation and stars. "Do you know what day today is?" David suddenly asked. Sarah smiled. 7 years since you found us. 7 years since we stopped being lost, Alexander corrected. "We should celebrate," Mark suggested. "Like a birthday." "It is a birthday," Sarah said. "Our family's birthday." David hugged all 3 of them, feeling the warmth, the love, the absolute fullness of that moment. He had lost 8 years, but he had won an entire life, and that, finally, was enough. On the 10th anniversary of their reunion, David was invited to give a talk at a conference on corporate social responsibility. It was a large event, with hundreds of successful business people, all looking for the magic formula for success. He stood on the stage, microphone in hand, looking at the sea of expensive suits and luxury watches, and instead of the prepared speech, he told his story. He talked about Sarah, how he had seen her on the street, and how his world had stopped. He talked about Mark and Alexander, about their hungry eyes and fragile bodies. He talked about the pain, the regret, the sleepless nights, and he talked about redemption, about forgiveness, about the second chance that life had given them. "For years I measured success in millions and properties," he said, "but the day I found my family on that sidewalk, I understood that I had been measuring with the wrong ruler. True success is measured in love, in presence, in the small things that make life worth living." There was absolute silence in the auditorium. Then, applause. Not the polite protocol applause, but a real one, full of emotion. After the talk, dozens of people came up to share their own stories. Stories of broken families, of wrong priorities, of lost time. And David listened to each one, offering not magical solutions, but the simple truth. It is never too late to change. When he got home that night, he found Sarah in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was 38 now, with some grey hairs she refused to dye and laugh lines around her eyes. She was more beautiful than ever. "How was it?" she asked. "Intense but good. I think some people really listened. They always do when you speak from the heart." The children, no longer so young at 15 years old, came in noisily, arguing about soccer. Alexander had grown tall and thin, still serious but with an easier smile now. Mark was more robust, always with a joke on his lips and a plan in mind. "Dad, tell Mark that the local team is better," Alexander demanded. "I am not getting into those deadly discussions," David laughed. "But, come on, help set the table." They ate dinner together, as they did every night. They talked about the day, about the plans for the weekend, about the everyday nonsense that makes life beautiful. And when they finished, Alexander took a letter from his backpack. "I got this today," he said, putting it on the table. It was an acceptance letter from a summer program for young social leaders, a recognition of his work at the foundation. "I am so proud of you," David said, his voice broken with emotion. "I learned from the best," Alexander replied simply. That night, after the boys went to sleep, David and Sarah sat on the balcony as many times before. The city shone below them, millions of lives unfolding in the darkness. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked, resting her head on his shoulder. "That we are lucky, that somehow, despite everything, we found our way back to each other." "It was not luck," Sarah said. "It was a choice. We chose to believe. We chose to forgive. We chose to stay." David kissed her forehead. "Do you know what the real lesson of all this is?" "What?" "That human dignity is not measured by the bank account, that true love survives everything, and that second chances exist, but only if we have the courage to take them." Sarah smiled in the dark. "That sounds like a motivational speech." "Maybe, but it's true." They stayed there, embraced, as the night went on. Two people who had lost so much, who had suffered so much, but who had found their way back home. Not because it was easy, not because it was perfect, but because they had chosen love over pride, family over fear, and hope over despair. And on that balcony, under the city stars, with their sons sleeping peacefully in their bedrooms and a whole life ahead of them, David and Sarah understood that they had found what everyone searches for, a place to belong, people who choose us every day, and the quiet certainty that, no matter what happens, they will not be alone. Money could buy many things, but it could never buy that, and that in the end was the only wealth that mattered.